Hi, for the next 24 hours, I'm going to be reading this book, Under the Volcano by Malcolm Lowry, cover to cover, and it's going to be a blast. So, here we go. um, Under the Volcano, one of the towering novels of parentheses, the century, New York Times, with a new afterword by William T. Ballman. Malcolm Lowry, a novel. Harper Perennial, Modern Classics. Under the Volcano. Malcolm Lowry, Under the Volcano, with an introduction by Stephen Spender and an afterword by William T. Ballman. To Marjorie, my wife. Introduction by Stephen Spender. In 1936, Malcolm Lowry wrote a short story called Under the Volcano. It is the account of the excursion to the Fiesta at Chapultepec of a man called only the Consul, accompanied by his daughter Yvonne and her fiancé Hugh. The outing is brutally interrupted by a scene of murder. The body of an Indian, his hat pulled over his eyes to conceal the wound, from which blood flows over his face, is discovered lying under a hedge on the roadside. The bus in which the three are traveling is stopped, the passengers get out, and, owing to the Mexican laws which can make those who go to the assistance of the victims of violence accessories after the fact, they are unable to do anything to help the Indian. Before the disaster, the consul, making sure there's no spoilers, before the disaster, the consul, who's a drunkard, has noticed conspiratorially a fellow passenger, a pelados, he thought, the peeled ones, those who did not have to be rich to prey on the really poor. Close parentheses. The Pallado was, quote, very drunk indeed, and he felt a queer envy of him, albeit it was perhaps a stern fellowship, close quote. After the encounter with the corpse, the consul is the one to notice that the Pallado has stolen the dying man's money, with which, indeed, he basely and impertinently pays his fare. The bus arrives at the Fiesta, and the consul and Hugh notice the Pallado swagger into a pulqueria, quote, stepping high and with a fatuous smile of triumph on his face, close quote. The plot of the novel, published more than 10 years later under the same name, is complete in this story. It integrates the tragic fatalism of Mexico, the dying Indian unaided, the despoiler of the corpse triumphant, with the consul's own situation, his mind guiltily preoccupied with the questions of where he is going to get his next drink, his companions involved in their relationship, which excludes him. Like Joyce's sketch of the morning walk of a traveling salesman through Dublin, which was the seat of Ulysses, Lowry's rather sketchy story grew into a masterpiece. Do Irish breakfast. Sounds good, right? In the book, two essential and revealing changes have been made. Yvonne is no longer the consul's daughter. She is his wife who, having left him on account of his dipsomania, has come back. Her fiancé, Hugh, has become the consul's half-brother. Putting the two fictions side by side, the ambivalence of the father-daughter relationship and that of the rival who is also the half-brother, throws light on the consul. The novel explores the consul's past and present, relates his private doom to the tragic fatalism of the Mexican scene. What was an episode extends into a cavalry. At the outset here, I should dispose of what may seem to some readers a serious objection to this novel, the consul's dipsomania. A book in which, for 3/4 of the time, the hero is drunk may seem too special, too much a case history. It is not, they may protest about normal life, and therefore it does not concern them. The objection has some weight. In fact, the last scenes of the book, I think that the disintegration of the consul does, perhaps inevitably, tend to take over too much. The consul becomes an object. The tragic ending seems too fragmented. Oh, tragic? But it is only at the very end that the consul seems his own special case. The fragmentariness of this last section rather serves to underline the control and lucidity of all that happens until the consul's death. For this is a most lucid novel. Under the Volcano is, it is true, perhaps the best account of a drunk in fiction. That's hysterical. The consul's addiction is treated as a kind of tragic game in which there are as many moves as moods, played by the consul to deceive the others, but still more to deceive himself. Cool. The root cause of his drinking is loneliness. The early pages of the book in which Madame Laurel mediates on his boyhood, Monsieur Laurel mediates on his boyhood friendship with the consul, indicates this clearly enough. For those who seek it out, the clinical history of the consul's longing for companionship, fear of sex, deeply idealistic Puritanism, rejection of the world, and suppressed homosexual tendency is embedded in the narrative. By the time we have finished the novel, we know how a drunk thinks and feels, walks and lies down, and we experience not only the befuddledness of drinking, but also its moments of translucent clairvoyance, perfected expression. All the same, that Lowry elaborates the distinctions between beer and wine and bowls in the black mass experience of mescal is only incidental to the consul's real tragedy, which concerns this world in these times. Fundamentally, Under the Volcano is no more about drinking than King Lear is about senility. It is about the consul, which is another matter. For what we feel about him is that he is great and shattered. We also feel that he could have written the novel which describes his downfall, and this means that, considering as an art of consciousness attained, this is no downfall, but his triumph. Ew. Oh, never mind. Most of all, Under the Volcano is one of a number of works about the breakdown of values in the 20th century. Just as the collapse of power in King Lear is envisioned through the shattered mind of the king, so Under the Volcano is the tragic despair of Mexico, and, beyond Mexico, the hopelessness of Europe, torn by the Spanish Civil War, seen magnified and distorted in the minds of the consul and of Hugh. We're moving. The consul, then, is a modern hero, or anti-hero, reflecting an extreme external situation within his own extremity. 1 second. Oops. His neurosis becomes diagnosis, not just of himself, but Jesus. Okay. What was I? His neurosis becomes diagnosis, not just of himself, but of a phase of history. It is artistically justified because neurosis, seen not just as one man's case history, but within the context of a wider light, is the dial of the instrument that records the effects of a particular stage of civilization upon a civilized individual. For the consul is essentially a man of cultivation. You are drooping. Why are you? Whew, okay, that shouldn't happen again. That the most sensitive individual, although not the most normal, may provide the most representative expression of a breakdown which affects other people on levels of which they may be scarcely conscious. Yet, seeing the needle on the disc of the recording instrument, they know that what registers is also in some sense their own case. So, Under the Volcano has to be considered in the context of Europe of the 1920s and 1930s, which produced Ulysses, The Wasteland, The Orators, and other works about the modern breakdown of values. At the same time, it is utterly different from these works, for the reason that Lowry was, to an extent disconcerting even to himself, different as a man, and in his approach to writing from Joyce and Eliot. Most of all from those 1930s writers with whom he considered the schoolmasters of poetry. The difference was that Lowry's approach to writing was autobiographic, personal, subjective even, whereas the aim of writers like Joyce and Eliot, whom he adored, dreaded, imitated, misunderstood, was to invent a modern objective literature which was purged of autobiographic, subjective elements. Joyce, Eliot, and Pound aimed at writing which was an escape from, not an expression of, personality. Their devices of symbolism and mythology, their attitude towards tradition, their detachment and irony were all directed toward an even greater objectivization. In the consciousness of these poets and novelists there seemed the map of an immense landscape with, on one side of a central divide, the order of the past, on the other, the chaos of the present. According to their aesthetic, the poet is an instrument of sensibility acted upon by the situation in which he lives, relating past order to present chaos, exercising judgment, but not communicating his personality. His aim is to create a work of classical objectivity in which the order of the past is recreated, in a form which reflects the fragmentation of the present. The poet himself wears an imposed ironic mask. The remoteness of Malcolm Lowry from such intellectualized aims becomes apparent if one compares his use of myths and symbols in Under the Volcano with Joyce and Eliot's. Several critics have pointed out that Under the Volcano is crammed with references to myths. An example occurs early on in the book. Monsieur Laurel, the French film producer, who was a boyhood friend of Geoffrey Firmin, the consul, and who later falls in love with Yvonne, spoilers, thinks over the events of the consul's death several years later as he walks down the plateau on which lies Quanahuac. Halfway across the bridge he stopped. He lit a new cigarette from the one he'd been smoking and leaned over the parapet looking down. It was too dark to see the bottom, but here was finality indeed, and cleavage. Quanahuac was like the times in this respect. Wherever you turned, the abyss was waiting for you round the corner. Dormitory for vultures and city Moloch. When Christ was being crucified, so ran the sea-born, heretic legend. The earth had opened all through this country. though the coincidence could hardly have impressed anyone then. It was on this bridge the consul had once suggested to him he make a film about Atlantis. Yes, leaning over just like this, drunk but collected, coherent, a little mad, a little impatient. It was one of those occasions when the consul had drunk himself sober. He had spoken to him about the spirit of the abyss, the god of storm, Huracan, that testified so suggestively to intercourse between opposite sides of the Atlantic, whatever he had meant. This passage contains a good deal of symbolic myth, but it is used as metaphor, as analogy. It is not as an Eliot and Pound mythology with which the contemporary situation is identified, and thus, as it were, within the past transcended. The abyss cleaving the Mexican plateau under the volcano is like the times, the 1930s and 1940s. There is the suggestion of Christ descending into the abyss for the harrowing of hell, but it is the consul whom we think of here rather than Christ. The consul is hurled into this abyss at the end of the novel. A critic, Mr. David Markson, points out that the all-embracing mythic evocation in Under the Volcano is Joycean, and he cites Homeric parallels in this novel to match those of Joyce and Ulysses. To cap Joyce, as it were, with Eliot, he adds that this novel embodies concepts from Jung, Spengler, Freud, Frazer, Spinoza, Jessie L. Weston, Oriental metaphysics, and, for good measure, the philosophical idealism of George Berkeley. This is all very well, but it is misleading if it makes one think that the mind and life revealed in Under the Volcano at all resembles those in Ulysses, or Finnegan's Wake, or The Wasteland. The fact is that, though all three writers may use myths and symbolism, and may be concerned with the crisis of the modern world, the aims and methods of Lowry are the opposite of those of Joyce and Eliot. Joyce and Eliot use particular instances of modern people in order to move towards, enter into, the greater universality of a tradition of which modern life is only a fragmentary part. That's a run-on sentence. They use myths and symbols to get outside the times into the past of the tradition. Lowry uses them to exemplify the times, to describe the consul as illustration almost. Symbol and myth are used in Ulysses in order to absorb the characters at certain moments into a kind of cosmic consciousness. Lowry uses them with opposite effect in order to create the interior world of the consul. Stephen Dedalus and Bloom tend to disappear into the cosmos. We finish Under the Volcano feeling that the consul, with all his defects, is the cosmos, and that he is also Malcolm Lowry. This is perhaps a way of saying that Malcolm Lowry and his hero are romantics. It has been said that the hero of Ulysses is the language in which the book was written, and one would not imitate Joyce quarreling much with this, providing one adds the language is the history of the race. The hero of Under the Volcano is the autobiographic consciousness of the consul, who is a mask for Malcolm Lowry. Lowry is concerned with the ability of the consul, conditioned by circumstances which are partly those of his own psychology, partly imposed by the times, to wrest a triumph from himself, to create an order out of the material which is his own fragmented consciousness. Under the Volcano is not a statement about civilization so much as an account of one man's soul within the circumstances of a historic phase. In this sense, it belongs not to the literature of the picture of the West of the 1920s, but to the more restrictive literature related to that time, and more especially to the 1930s. In Lowry's tradition, the myths and symbols are not mysterious. The myths and symbols are not mysterious centers of a tradition which lies outside this time as much as usable devices, guides, oh my gosh, keep losing my place. Devices, guides, signposts indicative of the times. They are what the consul knows and is a frustrated great man. Joyce permits his characters to know more than they are likely to have known. However, we scarcely marvel at Leopold Bloom's knowledge, still less at Stephen's, nor do we think of the mind that permeates Ulysses as that of James Joyce. We recognize it in a historic consciousness which exemplifies a civilization. And Under the Volcano, we take the mythology to demonstrate the greatness of understanding the consul. It is a part of his ruinous triumph and demonstrates the tragedy of the scholar's mind overthrown. The effect of our reading about ships with the name Oedipus, Tyrannus, and Philoctetes, of throbbing drums accompanying his funeral procession, the Ferris wheel, the barranca, the deep ravine called the Malabolge, the riderless horse, and so on, are the machinery of his tragedy, itself a machine. They are the consul, that late romantic, almost Byronic, self-dramatizing figure. Lowry has borrowed from Joyce, turning his symbolic devices upside down, and used them for his own purposes, either with an audacious intelligence, or else from a kind of inspired misunderstanding. But the most direct influence on this extraordinary book is not, as I would suggest, from other novelists, but from films, most of all, perhaps those of Eisenstein. The movies, that is, the old silent, caption-accompanied movies, are felt throughout the novel. Jacques Laurel is a film director, disillusioned with Hollywood. The consul suggests to him a subject for a film. Yvonne had been a movie actress, though apparently a failed one. He was a character who could easily appear in a film about the Spanish Civil War or a revolutionary film about Mexico. The technique of Under the Volcano is essentially cinematic. The action starts off as an extended flashback in the mind of Monsieur Laurel, who, reminded on his walk of the consul's death, reenacts in his thoughts the sequences which led to this catastrophe. He then thinks back still further to the boyhood scenes when Jacques Laurel and Geoffrey Fearman were the guests of the family of an English poet, Abraham Taskerson. There are flashbacks within flashbacks and abrupt shifts from extended scenes to close-ups. The technique employed often resembles cutting. The phrase Las manos de Orlac occurs repetitively. It is on a poster advertising a film in which the chief actor is Peter Lorre. We are told a good deal about this film. Hugh explains to Yvonne, shortly after his arrival, "I think I've seen the Peter Lorre movie somewhere. He's a great actor, but it's a lousy picture. It's all about a pianist who has a great sense of guilt because he thinks his hands are murderers or something, and keeps washing the blood off of them. Perhaps there really are murderers, but I forget." This is also an example of Lowry's theme illustrating symbolisms, but it also underlines the preoccupation of all the characters with the cinema. Early on, Yvonne had described the little cinema in the village. "It's a strange little place. You might find it fun. The newsreels used to be about 2 years old, and I shouldn't think it's changed any. And the same features come back over and over again. Cimarron and the Gold Diggers of 1930, and, last year we saw a travelogue, Come to Sunny Andalusia, by way of news from Spain." "Blimey," Hugh said. The words Las manos de Orlac arise naturally enough. Whenever one of the characters catches sight of them, a movement of the camera eye glancing at a printed notice, one thinks of, "I am a camera." Someone should write a thesis paper perhaps on the influence of cinema in this novel. The serious novel. The cinemagoer's familiarity with this technique is most ingeniously converted into a literary device. Phrases with deeper meanings, "No se puede vivir sin amar," and "Le gusta este jardín? Que es suyo? Evita que sus hijos lo destruyan," are interpolated into the action, like subtitles in a foreign language. And of course, the technique of divided attention is used to wondrous effect to convey a characteristic of the consul's drunkenness, his diffused attention. The cinema is kinetic. Lowry, creating a moving landscape, or a still landscape against people moving, borrows from it for his own kinetic writing. He seems to write with every faculty which is active, or observes action. The calf muscles, the throat swallowing, the frank outward-looking eye observing, the memory reenacting. In the flashback of M. Laurel's recollections of the seaside holidays with the Taskerson family, this fusion of muscular mental energies of body and intellect is seen in its raw states as altogether joyous and outgoing, though accompanied by darker undertones. They are memories in which the reader falls in love with, envies, regrets. Those boys were unprecedented, portentous walkers. They thought nothing of walking 25 or 30 miles in a day. But what seems stranger still, considering none was above school age, they were also unprecedented, portentous drinkers. In a mere 5-mile walk, they would stop at as many pubs and drink a pint or two of powerful beer in each. Even the youngest, who had not turned 15, would get through his 6 pints in an afternoon. And if anyone was sick, so much the better for him. That made room for more. Neither Jacques, who had a weak stomach, though he was used to a certain amount of wine at home, nor Geoffrey, who disliked the taste of beer, and besides attended a strict Wesleyan school, could stand this medieval place. But indeed the whole family drank inordinately. Old Taskerson, a kindly sharp man, had lost the only one of his sons who had inherited any degree of literary talent. Every night he sat brooding in his study with the door open, drinking hour after hour, his cats on his lap, his evening newspaper crackling distant disapproval of the other sons, who for their part sat drinking hour after hour in the dining room. A passage of this kind has the energy of the life it describes. One sees it all. One could cast the plot, which is so innocent and yet so undermined. Singing their exhilarated song, "Oh, we all walk ze wibbly-wobbly walk," the lovable Taskersons, with Jacques Laurel and Geoffrey Fearman conscripted into their doomed army, walked to Hell Bunker, in the middle of a long, sloping 8th fairway. It guarded the green in a sense, though at a great distance, being far below it and slightly to the left. The abyss yawned in such a position as to engulf the third shot of a golfer like Geoffrey. Hell Bunker is also a place where the Taskerson boys took their girls, though there was, in general, about the whole business of picking up an air of innocence. So there is an underground connection between the hell of the seaside golf course and that gulf, the barranca of Malaborge at Quanahuac. Jacques Laurel one day accidentally surprises Geoffrey Fearman scrambling out of Hell Bunker with a girl. Embarrassed, they go to a bar where Geoffrey, for the first time, orders a round of whiskeys, which the waiter refuses to serve them because they are minors. Alas, their friendship did not for some reason survive these two sad, though doubtless providential, little frustrations. The passage about the golf course contains the elements which are to be found on most pages of Under the Volcano. Symbolism is used symptomatically to analyze a complex which is part individual, part a consequence of the times. To use psychoanalytical language, the same material of individual and social neurosis is sifted through a great variety of situations. Malcolm Lowry's view of life is individualistic in a way in which the views of Joyce and Faulkner and Eliot are not. Joyce's characters are, as I have pointed out, instruments through which a consciousness, ultimately historic, collective even, speaks. How they act is relevant in revealing what they are and beyond them what life is. With Lowry, one is never far away from the thought that, although there is an illness, there might also be a cure. If the consul would act, a great deal, beside himself, might be saved, one feels. It's a terrible sentence. Thus, his failure to act becomes itself a kind of action. His refusal to be heroic makes him a hero, but a hero of consciousness rather than indulging in the Spanish Civil War heroics of hue. What seems to him his deepest truth is his isolation. He rejects love to protect this isolation. One cannot imagine Stephen Dedalus or Leopold Bloom doing anything that would alter the whole situation of Ulysses, but if the consul acted, Under the Volcano would be a changed world. Consciousness is, for Lowry, the effect of individual action. Through the consul's thoughts, there runs the argument that if he can attain the fullest consciousness only through drinking mescal, then he must drink it. Dipsomania is justified, or to be endured. He also feels profoundly that in these times the price to be paid for being fully aware is isolation. His dilemma is to decide whether